Teachers, what is the worst experience you have had with a student's parent? Please postpone today's test. My son left his backpack at school yesterday so he couldn't study. Do not ever write down my son's name as Chris M. Just because another student has his same first name. He is receiving unequal treatment because you are addressing him by his first name and first letter of last name. This is deeply unfair and I will be talking to your principal. I taught first grade at a small private school. My first year I had the ultimate helicopter parent. He looked at everything and got on his child's case about everything from his test scores to the quality of his homework. He always had questions about the curriculum, my teaching methods, etc., etc. The child was a bit of a precocious boy, very smart but already rebelling from being under his dad's thumb all the time. The dad would want to come in and observe the student's behavior. Dad would volunteer in the classroom but would spend most of his time critiquing his son. He'd then want to have long conferences about his son's behavior. I told him I thought his son acted out more when he was there and that I didn't think he should be in the classroom anymore, and the dad's solution was to install a camera in the classroom so he could observe him without actually being there. Obviously that didn't happen. I learned a lot about setting boundaries that year. It's my first year and I have a helicopter mother who is in my room more than administration. She's the same exact way and complained to me about her first grade experience not being the same as kindergarten. It basically all boiled down to the fact that her child has become more independent and she can't handle the thought of him not needing her. I've learned a lot about boundaries as well. At a parent-teacher conference I had a mother say that her daughter was worthless unless she learned English better because her daughter wasn't pretty enough to amount to anything in life. The daughter was there and needed to translate for her mother several times. In recent memory, I have a deaf student and her parents don't know sign language. Well, her mom knows a little and dad knows none. At back to school night dad kept talking about how she needs to set her sights lower for her career plans. Most of the time I never hear from parents. 170 kids per year and 15 show up for back to school night type stuff. That's the worst. I seriously cannot imagine not being willing to spend the time to communicate with my child if they had hearing impairment. Parent and child had a complaint about grading on a minor assignment. Parent emailed me, the principal, Board of Education, and Barack Obama. No reply from anyone, except the principal. I once had a student hit me. I reported the student and they were suspended. Mom was adamant that I had made the whole thing up, even though it was witnessed and there was photographic documentation of the mark it left. The next year, that student's sibling was in my class. Mom had them removed after she found out because this teacher has a clear vendetta against my children. The sibling was really upset and tried to say that I was always nice and helpful, but mom wouldn't listen. She thought I was just lulling the sibling into a false sense of security before striking. I've been screamed at by parents, but for some reason this experience was far worse for me. I had this complete nightmare of a student. Never did her homework and she never studied and she did terribly on tests. One day after class I had a meeting scheduled with her parents to talk about her current F in the class and the possibility of her repeating the course. When the parents got here they proceeded to yell at me and make threats to what they would do if their daughter didn't pass the class. They told me I obviously was singling their daughter out and she was doing badly because of me. My god, parents have gotten ridiculous. I got caught off guard during a conference with the parents of 2 students. I didn't expect it to go south because both students were doing fairly well, but it did. One parent was absolutely furious that her daughter wasn't doing as well as her son. Furious with me. That is, I was obviously giving him more support than her daughter. I couldn't get her to give me any specifics about what it was she wanted me to do differently. Of course, she just wanted to lay into me about my ability to do my job. Probably the most frustrating part of being a teacher is being blamed for things that you have no control over. Student gets a B instead of an A? You obviously taught the material poorly. Sigh. We have had twins and parents always compare them. It is kind of sad when one kid is clearly gifted and the other isn't and the mom is making the slower one feel stupid right there in front of him. Had a fun class and there was one joker kid who was asking questions about stuff that was coming up in the next chapter. I answered his question telling him to keep it in mind for the next chapter. A week or 2 later we get to that chapter. He mentions that he knows it, so I think it would be funny if he taught it using my slides while I sat in his chair and pretended to be a student. The kids thought it was great. He did a pretty good too. When he made a mistake, I'd pretend to ask a question with the correction built in. Everyone had a great time and seemed to learn a lot. Next week the kid's parent come in and accused me of picking on him and trying to embarrass him. At no point did they think to ask him if he had been embarrassed. They had tried to make an appointment with my principal to throw me under the bus without even talking to me. Luckily he was awesome and just told them to go talk to me. Just goes to show you don't know what your students are telling their parents, and even if it's the truth, how parents are interpreting it. I feel bad for the kid cause he and I got along so great before that incident, but I wouldn't think of kidding around with him after that. That sounds like such an awesome way to handle that. In my limited experience, he is the best way to learn is to teach. I bet that kid knows that chapter really well. Shaking things up for the class probably did a ton to wake people up and get attention as well. This isn't the scariest or the most serious example, but this one dad peed me off pretty badly one time. He came to drop off his 2 daughters and then asks me to speak to one of my fellow instructors, who we shall call Sarah. We have a pretty standard policy of not offering up staff to irate parents until that staff member is given a heads up and agrees to speak with them. I gave him the standard, "Sarah isn't here right now, but can I help you with something?" and dad proceeds to explain how his 6-year-old was forced to go outside during a thunderstorm the day before to look for a ring maze Sarah had lost. He said all the other girls in his daughter's class were forced to spend a long time outside while it was raining looking for the teacher's ring, and his daughter had come home covered in mud. I thought this was strange and didn't seem like something Sarah would do. If anything, I imagine she would have just looked for her ring herself. I told him we would discuss it as a staff and take the appropriate action. When I talked to Sarah about the incident, she was incredulous. It hadn't been raining very heavily the day before, and Sarah and another staff had all the little kids after lunchtime, normally when they would go outside and play. Sarah found a plastic pool toy shaped like a ring, went outside to our playground and hid it, and then told the girls that they could choose between staying inside and playing board games, or joining her outside on a quest to find the magical ring that had been tragically lost. Most kids opted for the epic quest, and while it had been kinda muddy, the kids had a ball, but they still bring it up every once in a while. I guess this particular girl either didn't really get what was going on, or she got in trouble for being muddy and threw Sarah under the bus. My guess is the latter. It might not have even necessarily been either. She could have been happily telling her dad about what they were doing or explained why she was muddy, and her dad could have interpreted it differently and gotten angry. Sometimes parents just look for reasons to be upset. My mom is a teacher, and her worst was at an open house conference type thing. The 2 parents of a kid were getting a divorce, and apparently it was pretty rough. Both decided to go to the event that night. Well, they got into a fight about something and it heated up to the point where the wife started getting physical. My mom couldn't stop them, so they had to call the police. Our elementary schools don't really have conferences because there's typically no need to, so they just have a night where all the parents can show up and the teacher tries to talk to all of them. So 25 plus 8-year-olds were watching 2 parents get into a physical fight. Not a teacher, but I've been coaching for 2 years, and I had a parent ask me to come early day to talk about their kid. I thought there was a health issue or something, so I agreed. Turned out the parent was furious that their kid wasn't allowed to compete at real meets even though they had only been diving for a few months, and it takes about 2 years to really get everything down to be able to compete. She wanted me to let her kid go to regionals the next week, a meet you have to qualify for, when her child only knew how to do 2 dives, and you need 11 to go. Suffice to say, at the end of the session she pulled her kid out of diving to find a sport with a more immediate payoff. I had this butthole of a kid when I taught 8th grade. No matter what I called home about, his mom would make excuses and yell at me. Kid is talking, I need better classroom management. Kid is picking on others. Well, they probably bullied him first because of his weight, and what was I going to do to punish them? One day, he calls me over and tells me he needs to go change his pants because his dong is so big it was like a man's. His quote, and his pants were too tight and painful. He then grabs it through his pants to show me the outline. I had to report him for sexual harassment and there was an investigation. He got removed from my class. His mom told the school that I was never allowed to speak to her son again and that the whole situation was my fault because I looked too young to be teaching 8th graders. Don't talk to me or my son's man like dong ever again. Kid's mom. Students whose parents work in the building, teachers, custodians, assistants, cafeteria workers, etc., are the worst. If the kid isn't butthole and you tell their parent, you have to continue to work with that parent long after the kid is gone. I had a student, middle school, who was late to my class every day with a pass from his mom. I ended up having to go to the principal and have him take care of it. There's been a weird shift. Parents now see schools as a service like they would a hotel or restaurant. I work at an international school. For the most part, the students are fairly well behaved, like anywhere else. However, there are exceptions. There was one student, let's call him Bob. Bob was a very difficult student in numerous ways. He was disruptive, lazy and rude. I had him in 3 different courses the same year. Near the end of the last one, I was helping him after school with an assignment. The thing was, Bob actually had some ability in math and had managed to write enough correct answers when I woke him up during tests, so he still had a chance to pass this particular course. The assignment in question was long overdue. It was more than an hour after class had ended, on a Friday, I believe, and I was just generally tired of Bob's antics and lack of effort the whole year. While I'm helping him with a problem, he turns to me and says, "Do you ever just feel like a total failure because you're a teacher? Like, a huge failure?" Me, I want to aim so much higher than that. I took a few seconds to collect myself. Bear in mind that this student was over 20 years old and was failing a grade 10 applied math class. When I was his age, I was wrapping up an honors degree. The tuition his parents were paying to keep him in school was more than my university tuition. It took all of my patience and self-control to calmly explain that I didn't feel like a failure, that I enjoyed my job, and that, if he wanted to aim much higher, he might have to put in a little more effort than he currently was at some point. That is my worst so far. Bob has since dropped out. That almost seems like he was projecting his own feelings of being a failure onto you. One of my friends who works at a university in the geology department was contacted by a very angry parent that their son was being flunked or something, and had made some kind of challenge of, "You have so many students in your class that you don't even know who any of them are." So he went to go search for the student, and found there was absolutely no record of the student having taken any of his classes. He started to worry, because it was approaching the end of the year, and he could find absolutely no record of the student whatsoever. But the student had an ID and everything, so he did exist at the university. Later, it was found that the parent was yelling at the wrong department. The student was flunking geography, and the parent did not know the difference between the two. But most professors at the university level have a wonderful protection where unless the student is actually given permission, the professors are not allowed to speak to the parents at all on the student's behalf. And the majority of those children who have helicopter parents do not give any permission whatsoever for their parents to see how they are doing. I am sure they tell their parents, "I have been telling them you're allowed to have access to records. I don't know what is going wrong." During my 1 year as a teacher, I called a parent because he was kicking other students during class. Her response, "Not my little angel." I was then notified I'd be attending a conference with this parent and the principal. She called me a racist and demanded I be fired. The principal had my back, but only in private after the parent left. The mom must have told her son what she said, because I was greeted the next day by my almost entirely black orchestra defending my honor. My middle school French teacher told us the story of the kid who tried to do his whole assignment by putting it through Google Translate. The teacher even asked him if he used Google Translate. He denied it. Even the parents came in and vouched for their son. The whole thing was in fricking Spanish. We had a parent who liked to call and come in constantly. She found a way to mention in every sentence, "As you know, my husband is a doctor," to assert authority. She hadn't done anything significant in life. I've had a parent deliberately make me think her child had been abducted as a test because she hated the school's child protection officer. She arranged for her daughter to be collected by a friend, got her daughter to tell me the friend was her mum. This was in the first week of school, so I was still getting to know the parents. then stormed the school office demanding to know where her daughter was. She kept it up for half an hour, then admitted it had been a test and she knew exactly where she was. I'd been having visions of reading about her murder on the news and it all being my fault. I cried. I had one 5-year-old who was a pain in everyone's butt. He would get a little goofy, rampage, fall still and get tired. He never remembered all the crap he would pull each rampage, so we couldn't really help him correct his behavior. This happened 7-10 times every day, and then one of the techers put 2 and 2 together. He was having seizures. His rampages were his body preparing his brain for the impending episode. We approached this with his mom and this is what we noticed. We think it's important that he get checked way. She insisted it was evil spirits and pulled her son out of school. She taught 4th grade at the local elementary. Kid got moved to a different school still lacking appropriate help because education nowadays is about respect and not facts. I once had a girl in my elective class who was struggling with her mathematics. She wasn't going to college for anything math related and wasn't performing very well, worst in the class. I first told her that she may want to consider taking a different class during her junior year while she still could. That way, she could return to this class as a senior if she still felt inclined to do so. As the brain matures, ability to understand mathematics increases. Her parents went nuts, basically taking it like I was saying her daughter was too stupid to take the class. I had emails saying how they were going to get me fired. They called and emailed the principal to try to make it happen. I had a 99% approval rating from all students, the highest in the school. They were the 1%. These were helicopter parents. Their kids got away with everything. The daughter didn't take advantage of it much. She was a sweetheart, but their son sure did. He knew he could do whatever he wanted, and if the school tried to stop him, he'd just cry foul and his parents would support him. He died driving too fast around a corner. I blame the parents. That took a turn for the worst. I used to teach in a third world country 2 years ago and I had an autistic child in my class. He was extremely brilliant and kind but was always alone. I decided one day to give his parents a call and tell them what a wonderful student he was and wanted to meet with the parents to work on improving his social skills. The mother was shocked and told me that this was the first time any teacher would ever call for this purpose. Usually, teachers called during his outbursts to complain. I found out later on by the mother that whenever this student was misbehaving or not acting normal, his father would beat him. I then scheduled an emergency meeting with both parents and the principal to confront the father. Long story short, the father thought this method was the best method to get his son to act appropriately. But after thoroughly talking to him about how he is making his child worse, he started to worry. It took many meetings and hard work, but by the end of the year, the father improved tremendously. My student and his mother still keep in contact with me. When I travel back, I usually go to the school to see him and he is the first one of my students to run and give me a hug. Thank God for that ending. I really wish I got to hear more of this improvement stuff more often. You have been visited by the Holy Fruit Boy. If you comment Tiny Turtle, he will bless you with unlimited holy fruits. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check out another video, or don't. Either way, have a great day, you magnificent people.